I'm very excited for this presentation. Josh challenged me. We normally, with our curriculum, we have some standard presentations that we do that talk a lot about nutrition, that talk a lot about sleep, that talk about movement, and all these foundational things that most of us think about when we think about the word health and well-being. But when Josh asked me to do a different kind of presentation, I want to do something that I think is very relevant for the time frame that we've been going through. We all just went through 2020, one hell of a year for so many of us. Now we're into 2021. There's been a lot of stress. There's been a lot of emotions. There's been a lot of uncertainty. And so I wanted to explore in this presentation what I call the mind-body axis, which is essentially how our thinking, how our emotions dynamically affect our health, affect our gene expression, affect the kind of health outcomes we have. This connection is stronger than many of us may realize. And I think we're going to explore that today in a powerful way. And I want to start this presentation off by sharing a few stories with you guys. First person I want to introduce you to is Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright has a terminal lymphatic cancer diagnosis. So, we have these lymph nodes and these lymph chains throughout our bodies. Mr. Wright has cancer of those lymph nodes, and he has orange-sized lymph nodes in his neck, in his groin, in his armpits. He has around 1 week to live, and this is a true story. And the cancer is so progressed that his lungs fill up with fluid every single day. He needs to have it drained. The thing is, though, Mr. Wright doesn't want to die. So he goes to his doctor and he begs him to give him some kind of treatment that can work. And at the time, this was, I believe, in the 50s, there was a experimental drug called carbamazine that they were testing on lymphatic cancer. And so he begged his doctor to get him into this clinical trial for this new drug because he really felt it could help him. The problem is Mr. Wright probably had 1 week to live, and the trial wanted people who had at least 3 months to live because they want to actually test the efficacy of the drug. After pulling a few strings, though, Mr. Wright was admitted to the trial, and he received his first injection of carbamazine, and miraculously, with his doctor's complete surprise, 1 week later, when he saw him, Mr. Wright's tumors that were the size of oranges had shrunk back down to nearly normal lymph node size. They were shocked. And he sent him home, monitor him. By all means, Mr. Wright is doing phenomenally better. Except a couple of weeks later, there was a press release that came out that said that the drug, that carbamazine, that Mr. Wright was in trial for, didn't work. Or at least they didn't think it was working that well, and it was suspect. And so Mr. Wright got very discouraged because he thought this was some kind of miracle drug for him, and his cancer came back. Lymph nodes swelled right back up, and he went back into his doctor's office, basically right back where he was before. Now, his doctor was, again, shocked and dismayed at the reversal of the good effect that he had previously. So his doctor did something that by most standards, especially today, would be considered unethical. And he told Mr. Wright that he has an ultra concentrated form of the drug, absolutely pure, more effective than what they had before, and this would work. So Mr. Wright is, again, he doesn't want to die. He's very hopeful. So he receives his injection, except the doctor injected him with saline. There was no ultra concentrated form. And a few days later, again, Mr. Wright's tumor shrunk back down, and he went on with his life for the next several months, believing that he was doing so much better. Except again, there was another press release that came out from the American Medical Association saying that the drug definitively in their trials had not proven effective. Mr. Wright's tumors came back. He went in to see his doctor, and he passed away shortly afterward. Next story I want to share with you is a man called Stamatis Moriartis, Greek war veteran. This is in the 1900s where this story was. And Stamatis was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. He had advanced lung cancer. His doctors gave him around 9 months to live. And he went for a lot of different opinions, and they told him, Stamatis, we can give you some advanced therapies at the time, but we just don't think they're going to be successful for you. So Stamatis decided to go home to his native island in Greece to be with his family. And he wanted to be buried across from the Aegean Sea, where his family was from, in their local cemetery. So he went to Greece. And when he got there, his friends heard that he'd come back from the United States to Greece, and they greeted him. They came to him. They played dominoes. They brought him food. He drank some wine. He had a little vineyard on the property, and he just wanted to live out his last days with his wife and his family and his friends. And he noticed, though, about 6 months into this, that he started feeling better. He started going down to the pub at night and playing checkers and dominoes with his friends. And he even started gardening and doing some stuff out there in the vineyard that they had out in the island. And he kept on doing better. And 25 years later, Stamatis returned to the United States. He wanted to tell his doctors what had happened, except all of them had passed away. And this is him. He died at 104 in his garden in Greece.
Wow.
Yeah. So another true story. Absolutely amazing. I want to introduce you to a man named John. He was a college student at the time that this happened. And John had just broken up with his girlfriend. And he was seriously distressed about this. John had a history of depression, and he was in a clinical trial for a new kind of antidepressive medication. So after the breakup happened, John made a very rash decision and he wanted to end his life. So he took all of the pills in the bottle that he had from that clinical trial drug. And he immediately regretted the decision. He broke out into a sweat. His blood pressure started to drop, and he went to the hospital, basically expressing that he didn't want to die and he made a huge mistake. And when they got him into the hospital, they found that his blood pressure was 80/40. He was in a profuse sweat, basically in shock. And they started running tests on him to see what was going on. And they were looking at what kind of medication he took. And the doctors at the emergency room were able to look up the drug that he was on in the clinical trial. And turns out that John was on the placebo. John took an entire bottle of sugar pills, probably 15, 20 grams of sugar, and he induced himself into this fantastic state where he felt like he was basically about to die on his deathbed. After they explained that to him, he recovered. There's another phenomenal story from World War II. There was a medic named Dr. Henry Beecher, and he and one of his nurses were treating people with war wounds with morphine. You know, they had to do some kind of basically battle surgeries, so they'd give them morphine before the surgeries as an analgesic pain reliever, so people didn't go into shock and die. But there was huge morphine shortages. You can only imagine the number of people that were injured and needed medical help. So what they ended up doing is after they ran out of morphine, they started injecting people with saline without telling them. And 40% of the people they injected with saline, they were able to perform surgery on, and they reported a dramatic pain relief.
Wow.
Then there's a curious case of Timmy. Timmy is a person with a split personality. So Timmy has multiple personality disorder. He has one personality that is allergic to oranges. And so when Timmy drinks orange juice in this personality, he breaks out in hives. Except when Timmy is in his other personality and he drinks orange juice, he's not allergic and he has no immune reaction whatsoever. There's other similar cases with people with multiple personalities where one personality is diabetic and their blood sugars change. And when they switch into the other personality who does not believe he or she is diabetic, they have no problems. The blood sugars are normal. So the point of sharing these stories is that there is a profound connection between the mind and the body. Our mindset, our emotions, and our beliefs dynamically change the health outcomes and the things that we experience. And these stories are fantastic and they're so telling. And we're going to explore in the rest of this presentation how this link between the mind and the belief actually translates and influences biology and what we can do about it, practically speaking. And at the end of this presentation, I have some reflection questions for all of us here that we can help implement this information into our lives. Now, to begin this discussion, I want to introduce you to a man named Dr. Bruce Lipton. He has been a pioneer in the field of psychoneuroimmunology. That is a fancy word for basically looking at how the mindset, belief, emotions dynamically affects our biology, and particularly our immune system. And he wrote a book many years ago, very, very popular, called The Biology of Belief, that was documenting some of his early work on stem cells. So as you may know, stem cells are these original cell lines in our bodies. They can basically turn into any other kind of cell. So when stem cells are put into an area, let's say, of the muscle, they can turn into muscle tissue. When they're put into a liver, they can turn into liver cells. So stem cells are pluripotent in the sense that they have the ability to change into all different kinds of things. Turns out it's the environment that causes them to change. So when you culture stem cells in something that is like blood, that environment will help trigger that stem cell to differentiate into a red blood cell. When you put it in bone, it might do something like turn into a bone cell. Or if you put it in a joint, it might turn into a chondrocyte or something that produces cartilage. And this is super important because this is how our bodies develop. We have this potential in all of our cell lines. Then it is the environment in which that cell exists that ultimately determines how that cell grows up, differentiates, and expresses. This is important because our mindset and our emotions and our beliefs do affect our biochemistry. We can know things when we're stressed. We have different changes to hormonal signals. That's going to change ultimately the environment that our cells exist in, which will in turn the kind of proteins and different chemical signals that are expressed. So I want to play this little video of Dr. Bruce Lipton here because I think it's amazing. And it's going to, well, actually, we'll do one more slide, then we'll play the video. So the key point of this here is that genes are not static. They do not determine the fate and state of our health. And genes are constantly dynamically responding to the environment, and the environment being food, sleep, movement, our thoughts, and our emotions. And this is the process called epigenetics. Epi meaning on top of, genetics meaning our genetic code, our blueprint. We're going to talk about epigenetics, but first, again, this video from Bruce Lipton.
It took about 20 years before science owned what I was talking about. If you understand epigenetics, you don't need the pharmaceutical industry. That's not in the interest of one of the biggest industries on this planet to say, you can heal yourself without drugs? And I go, absolutely. Look, I can feed you with an idea that this pill that we just got from the pharmaceutical company, it's the greatest, best thing for your issue. And I give you this pill and you get better. And then later you find out it was a sugar pill and everybody goes, yeah, that's called the placebo effect. And I go, what does it really mean? I said, you didn't get healed by the pill, you got healed by the belief in the pill. At least 1/3, minimum of 1/3 of all medical intervention is, it's the placebo effect where the healing comes from. Everybody goes, yeah, I know about the placebo. I go, yeah, but that's a result of positive thinking. What about negative thinking? And this is what we don't talk about, but the reality is it's equally powerful in regard to affecting your biology as is positive thinking, but it works in the opposite direction. A negative thought is called the nocebo effect. Can cause any disease and you can die. If you believe you're going to die, you can die from the belief. So we really have to watch out because, as psychologists would tell us, 70% or more of our thoughts are negative and redundant, replaying the same negative thoughts. I go, if thoughts had nothing to do with it, fine. But thoughts, positive or negative, shape our biology. And all of a sudden it says, well, now it's time to wake up because our negative thinking is manifesting a negative life experience.
So let me continue back to present here. So the placebo effect, a beneficial effect produced by a placebo or drug treatment, such as a sugar pill, which cannot be attributed to the properties of placebo itself, and therefore must be due to the patient's belief in that treatment. We've all heard of it. It's obviously powerful. We have a belief, we have an expectation that this will help us that is clearly causing biochemical, physical changes in the body that leads to a beneficial outcome. And this is a headline I wanted to pull here from Wired magazine. Placebos are getting more effective. Drug makers are desperate to know why. Every time a pharmaceutical drug is brought to market, they're tested against placebos, and they have to beat placebos, because if they can't beat placebos, there's not a market for the drug. It's not as effective as just a belief. And there was a famous study that they compared Zoloft versus St. John's wort versus nothing on improving depression. Guess what won? Nothing won. The absolute nothing won. It beat Zoloft. It beats St. John's wort. This is published stuff. You can look it on PubMed. I'll also share some stuff here. So the key thing here is that placebos are powerful, and these prevent potentially hundreds, if not thousands of drugs of coming to market because they simply can't beat the power of our own belief in healing. So again, we have the nocebo effect, right? Which is when we have a negative expectation that can cause the treatment to have a more negative effect than it otherwise would. So if we're going into a treatment and we feel like it's going to be very scary or harmful for us, we can actually induce that response, even if that the negative effect that we receive is not due to the treatment itself. The brain can cause us, like John we saw with taking the sugar pills, to have a nocebo effect where we feel like we're going to die if we thought that we just took a bunch of pills that were going to kill us. So a quote from Bruce that's amazing is, if the brain expects that a treatment will work, it sends healing chemicals into the bloodstream, which facilitates that. That's why the placebo effect is so powerful for every type of healing. And the opposite is equally true and powerful. When the brain expects that therapy will not work, it doesn't, and it can cause harm. It's called the nocebo effect. So how does this actually happen though? Like, it's cool to know that these are very well and documented effects, but what's the process through which this stuff happens? And the secret lies in how your mind influences your genetics, and more importantly, your epigenetics. So this requires us to look at a little bit basics of how our body's genes, our blueprint, is kind of translated and works in terms of creating proteins and chemical signals. So here we have the classic DNA double helix. It's a strand of DNA. And I want to kind of break this down into how this works. Each of our cells inside the nucleus of this cell, this blue layer, has wound up sections of DNA in the form of chromosomes. And that is the blueprint for all of this. And the cool thing is that every cell in your body, whether it's a liver cell, whether it's a muscle cell, whether it's a cartilage cell, a skin cell, has your entire genetic blueprint. But obviously, those cells express very specific characteristics based on where they are. Now, when we unwind those chromosomes, we have a section of those that is a gene. And these genes are sequences of this larger DNA that give instructions for our bodies to make proteins. Everything in our body that's structural is made up of proteins. And this building block of our genetics basically tells our bodies which proteins to make. And this is why, although humans, we have almost all identical genetics across all of us, the slight variations that we do have can code for different types of proteins that might vary in terms of how much skin pigment we produce, the color of our eyes, etc. So this is another way to look at it. Essentially, we have, in this example, the gene and the DNA sequence here that makes purple flowers purple. So we have the DNA sequence that codes for that. That DNA sequence makes a protein that produces this pigment that makes flowers purple. And so this is basically how it is. Our DNA is the blueprint, and it gets translated through this process into essentially proteins and chemical signals that lead us to have a certain biological phenotypic effects. Now, the story doesn't stop there, right? Because we have epigenetics, which are basically the controllers that turn on and off your genes. And this is where the mindset and the emotions becomes very powerful, and the mind-body axis becomes very powerful. Because on our genes, we have these specific tags. They're called epigenetic tags. They're basically on and off switches on our genes. There's many different types of these on and off switches. We don't have to get into the complex, I guess you could say, chemistry or biochemistry of what those exactly are. But these tags are things like methyl groups, et cetera, that turn and turn off different segments of our genes. And our emotional expression and our emotional experiences can modulate our epigenetic tags. They can turn certain genes on and turn certain genes off. And the implication of all of this is that epigenetics reveals that we are not victims of our genes, but we are masters of our genes. You could have the genetic predisposition to have certain kinds of cancers. Maybe everyone in your family had breast cancer, but you may not express that because of good living, because of good thinking, because of good behavior. On the flip side, you may have protective genes for a lot of these things, but because of essentially some bad behaviors and stuff like this, your genetics can change. So our genes are not set. They are dynamically changing based on all the inputs we're doing with our health. That's why we're always talking about good, healthy living principles. We also need to talk about mindset here. And this graphic here really illustrates this point. We have a cartoon here, and this is the same man, same genetics, but on the right side here, we have unhealthy living, negative thinking, physical activity, fear, laziness. And on the other side, we have healthy living, positive thinking, physical activity, love, productivity. All these things we know is a good routine versus we could say is like a bad lifestyle routine. And it leads to dramatically different outcomes. Same genes, different expression. These are identical twins, absolutely identical. One of them has cancer, one of them doesn't. So they have the exact same genome, but they're experiencing different health outcomes. And there's largely because of the influences of the environment and the influences of thinking and emotions as well as a part of that environment. So positive epigenetic effects are essentially what I said is genes are equivalent to blueprints, epigenetics are the contractor, and the epigenetics change the assembly and the structure that we make. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting, and what Bruce Lipton was talking about earlier with the negative effects and how it affects our genome. This is in the BMC Medical Genetics Journal. And I'm going to read the quote here because I think it's powerful. What they found is that exposure to stress can modify DNA methylation. And DNA methylation is that epigenetic on-off switch. which may alter gene expression and therefore contribute to disease phenotypes, the diseases we see manifest in the body. Early life stress, such as childhood abuse and stress-related disorders, have lasting effects on DNA methylation that may persist into adulthood. So this is an example of stressful mental, emotional experiences early on in life that dynamically change genetic expression, that has lasting impacts in how those genes are expressing into different proteins later in life, and it can last into adulthood. This is powerful, important stuff. This is why trauma, which is an emotional experience, can lead to physical problems down the line. And we also know that mindset has positive effects on behavior. Optimistic people live as much as 15% longer than pessimists, according to a new study spanning thousands of people in 3 decades. So this is relatively recent, 2019. And this is not to say that just positive thinking led them to live longer, because optimistic people are also more likely to go do things like exercise, eat healthy, have good family relationships. All these things are very much associated with positive longevity. The key thing is it's this whole concert of effects that enhances our longevity when we have the proper mindset, and that's also influencing both our genes and our behaviors together. So key points recap before we kind of get into the next part of this talk. And point number 1 is that powerful belief in healing or harm changes our genetic expression and our biology. Key point number 2 is that the powerful belief in a positive outcome, which is thinking plus emotion, activates our body's innate healing capacity, which we experience as a positive placebo effect. And point number 3 is that negative thinking and chronic stress can create a hostile environment in the body, which alters genetic expression. And instead of flourishing, the body seeks protection, alters genetic expression, etc. So what do we do with all this info? I mean, it's very interesting to hear these stories, to learn a little bit more about epigenetics and how genes are influenced by environment and thinking. Well, the way I want to bring this back to make it practical, especially for what we're doing right now, is like investigating our lives, doing things good for our health and our routines, is to audit our lives in the following categories. The first one we must audit our lives in is in the category of our mindset and our beliefs. What is the quality of our thinking? What is our emotional health? Next category is our physical environment. Where, how, and with whom do we live? What are some things in our environment that are productive for us and health promoting? And what are some things that might be damaging and influencing our thinking and, again, our genetic expression? Our circadian rhythms, how we manage our sleep and biological clocks, is a huge area we must audit. Our nutrition and fuel, which is the quality and quantity of the food we have, plus nutrition practices like fasting, and then physical movement, how we move and train our bodies for health and performance. So what I want to do is ask some questions that we're going to reflect on in the rest of this presentation. I've written all these questions down into a PDF for you that we will deliver after this presentation. And as I'm going through this, I would advise you to maybe take some notes or do some thinking on which of these areas that you feel there are deficits or gaps, and which of these areas you feel like you're very strong at, and just start to do some reflective process. Because ultimately, with all this health information that we share here in this presentation and other stuff you might gather online, all that matters is that we reflect and apply. So that's what we want to do for the rest of this talk, is do some application. Again, you don't have to write these questions down because I have the PDF that we'll send out to you for these things. But when it comes to mindset and beliefs, questions we must ask ourselves is, what is the predominant quality of my thinking? We know it affects expression of certain genes. We know that optimism is a very good thing as associated with behaviors for longevity. Is your thinking positive or mostly negative? And what are your most recurrent negative thoughts, thinking patterns? What are those things? Can we make them conscious? What are the recurring thoughts that come up? How often do you feel fear? What do you fear? How often do you feel love? What is your main source of love or sources of love in your life? How optimistic do you feel about your future? How happy are you overall? And what limiting beliefs do you want or need to let go of? These are questions that I hope that you take the time to journal and reflect on, because I think in this category alone, mindset and belief, we can uncover a lot of these unconscious thinking patterns. And once we start to evaluate those things, we can improve them. And ultimately, that will improve the quality of our health. Next category we must look at is physical environment. Does your current environment make it easy for you to live healthy? Are you in a space, in a place where there's good food, sunshine, nice water, and it's convenient? Or Are you finding that your current environment is very challenging? Maybe you have negative influences in terms of other people. Maybe there's not a lot of great food where you live. Maybe you're not getting enough sunshine. What about your current environment brings you joy and happiness? What specifically is causing you unneeded stress? We saw from earlier in the talk, stress is changing methylation and DNA expression, something we definitely need to look at. Are you getting adequate sunlight and fresh air every day? Do you have a location where you exercise regularly? Do you feel supported and loved with your closest social connections? If so, which of those connections are particularly impactful? Which of those maybe not as supportive and loving as you'd like? And how can you improve your home and daily routine to make things easier and healthier? Next category, I'm going to invite you to audit as well, is your circadian rhythm. How well would you rate your sleep on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being the best possible, 1 being absolutely terrible. Are you getting 7+ hours of quality sleep every night? Do you wake up feeling refreshed, or do you wake up feeling tired? Do you rely on stimulants to give you energy for the day? Do you have a consistent bedtime and wake up time? How do you feel that you can improve your sleep? What are the gaps? What are the opportunities? And what are the biggest obstacles to getting great sleep, whether it's a phone, TV, racing mind, work, etc.? Final 2 categories, nutrition and fuel. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the quality of your nutrition? Is healthy eating an area where you feel motivated and that you need to make some improvements? Are you eating fresh fruits and veggies every single day? Are you drinking at least half your body weight in ounces every single day? How often do you feel overcome by the sensation of food cravings, particularly late at night, particularly if you feel stressed? How much alcohol do you drink? Do you feel like it's too much? And the final category is physical motion. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your weekly exercise routine? Are you getting some form of movement every single day? Do you sit for more than 6 hours a day? There's a lot of powerful research that shows that prolonged sitting, even if you exercise, is uniquely harmful for health and longevity. Do you feel like you're getting stronger and fitter, or are you getting weaker and unhealthier? Does your body hurt when you wake up, or does it hurt at the end of the day? How consistent are you with exercise? What exercise do you really enjoy? And how can you improve your exercise routine? I want to open this up for discussion at this point, because the point of this presentation was twofold. One, to share some stories and to share some of the background on how our mindset and our emotions affect our bodies through the placebo, nocebo effects, and how our genetics are dynamically changing based on our emotion and our thinking. Most importantly, in part 2, what I want to invite you to do is do the reflection questions. I will send you the PDF, and I invite you to journal on every single one of those categories today to find some insights for yourself. The beautiful thing about self-reflection is we could use our own awareness to essentially be our own doctor. I think that's essentially what we all want, is to have the autonomy, the control to be able to improve ourselves through our awareness. And that starts with doing some kind of reflection. So I want to thank you for watching this presentation. I think I got through it a little quicker than expected. And perhaps this is the time where we can open things up for some Q&A, some discussion, and reflecting on this talk. And I think that the reflection questions as well will be very valuable for today. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Anthony. This is great. Let's open up for questions. This is supposed to be an open forum now, so don't be shy. Unmute yourself.
I have a question for you, Dr. Anthony, to kick things off. Could you elaborate on the importance of sleep? I mean, I know me personally, I do not get 7 hours of sleep, but like occasionally I'll like be able to whip in a 20-30 minute nap, in the middle of the day. Like, can you elaborate more on the importance of sleep and sleep health?
Yeah, absolutely. So our bodies, we are biocircadian beings. Our ancient ancestors, and as we kind of developed this human biology, we did it in concert with the light and the dark cycles of the sun rising, and how that dramatically has profound effects on the different hormonal cascades. As sun hits our eyes, our brain produces serotonin. That gets converted to melatonin later in the day. And then at night, when the light normally goes down, our brain secretes melatonin, which gets us resting. It's an anti-inflammatory, antioxidant in the brain. So it's essential that we keep our rhythm here. And this is why it's easy to say get 7+ hours of quality sleep. And that's a number that's nice to throw out. Everyone has a different variety of amount of sleep that they need. I can say my wife, Paige, needs less sleep than me. There's probably some genetics involved with that. There's probably also how much exercise you may be doing. So I think the best gauge is probably, are you waking up feeling refreshed? I would say if you're getting less than 6 hours, it's probably not enough, especially because it's our brain's chance at night when we're sleeping to actually clean itself. We have this whole lymphatic system in the brain called the glymphatic system with these glial cells that actually cleans up the brain, gets rid of, problem proteins, metabolic buildup, et cetera. And if we don't sleep as well, we wake up the next day, our blood sugars are out of control. We're more insulin resistant. So sleep is essential. Like with all of our Fit Father and Fit Mother programs, we make sure that people are sleeping well before they even start doing intensive exercise, because we know that like if sleep is controlling, which we do know, this whole hormonal cascade, if sleep is messed up, all of our other efforts are just not going to be as effective. They take two groups of people, they put them on, let's say, like weight loss diets. One group sleeps well, one group doesn't. The group that sleeps well loses weight, gains muscle. The group that doesn't sleep well loses weight in the form of muscle tissue and loses less weight. So this whole hormonal cascade is controlled by sleep. So when it comes down to not getting enough sleep, for most people, it's because I feel like, quote unquote, I'm too busy. So I think the first thing to get around that kind of idea is, number one, to make a deeper emotional connection to how important sleep is, that we make it a priority. And number two, it's to probably work on that bedtime routine about like, when is your turn off time with work? When is the time when the phones and the stuff go off? What is your consistent bedtime routine? And how can you make that a little more like on the button, that you get to bed, let's say at 11, you get up at whatever time you get up at. I just know it's an area for most of us, as being busy and being in a Western country, we could work on improving. It's just essential. So, Mackie, I don't know if you wake up feeling tired or not. If you feel refreshed when you wake up, you may not need that much more sleep. But ideally, in a perfect world, we'd all be able to wake up naturally with our bodies just waking up because we have enough sleep. We wouldn't necessarily need alarms, and we would need stimulants to prop us up. But again, we have a very high-paced society that's not exactly the same as if you're Stamatis Moriartis living in Greece on your little vineyard. Like, that's a very natural life, right?
So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Hey, I have I guess a question building on what Mackie said. So I recently got the Aura ring, and I realized for the longest time, I could not remember my dreams. And part of it is I don't get deep sleep. And on the nights that I do have deep sleep is when I dream and I remember my dreams. What are some tips to get better deep sleep?
Well, I would say a couple things. One, it's interesting you saw that correlation, because you're actually dreaming during the REM sleep, but you're finding that when you get deep sleep, you wake up remembering your dreams. So that's what you're saying. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yep.
So to kind of break that up, sleep is like, just for bigger background information, sleep is a series of different cycles that the body goes through. There's like each sleep cycle is roughly around 90 minutes. And early in the night, we get more deep sleep. Deep sleep is very rejuvenating for the body. Brain is very inactive, and the body is really healing and restoring. And then earlier, as the morning goes on, we're getting close to waking up, we get more REM sleep, and that's where we're actually dreaming. And then we remember the dreams. Deep sleep, I think the key is actually to get more regular exercise. It seems that when people exercise more consistently, the body gets into deep sleep better. I would say another tip I would have is probably not ingesting too much food within like 3-4. I would eat dinner earlier is what I'm trying to say. Have more fasting time between dinner and bedtime, because as the body wants to go into deep sleep, a couple things are happening. One, your core temperature is dropping at night. Two, your digestive tract should be slowing down and not being as active. And that's the problem when we do eat too close to bed or have foods that cause a little more digestive stress and effort for our bodies, is core temperature actually rises with that food intake, and the GI organs are actually still working at night. So I would say, exercise consistently. If you're not doing something every day, I think that would be an area of opportunity, as well as maybe increasing that interval between when you have dinner and kind of like doing a mini fast, like starting that fast before you go to bed could be good. Other things would be looking at sensory input. Like, do you have the opportunity to sleep with some earplugs or a face mask or dark out your room a little bit more, these things can definitely be helpful. And another thing that is very helpful because you're tracking your sleep is actually having a cooler bed. Like they have these things like called Oolers or chili pads or stuff like that that can make your bed a little cooler. It actually just, you set a temperature, it stays there. And the cool thing about that, because I know, Jess, you do kind of like the tech stuff on some of these things, is it can actually change the bed temperature dynamically throughout the night. So it starts off cool and it gets a little warmer as the night goes on, and you're waking up in the morning with warmer temperatures. So you can actually kind of really sync up your bed's temperature to your natural circadian temperature through sleep. Could be another helpful tip.
What was the name of that? What was it
Ooler,
called?
Ooler, Ooler.
Okay.
My wife and I have them. We love them. They're really cool.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I just got one of those weighted blankets, and that's done a lot for sleep. I don't know if you have an opinion on the weighted blankets,
I think they're great.
but it does kind of keep you cool or warm, antimicrobial, something like that. But just having that weight, I've noticed a real difference in the deepness of my sleep.
Nice.
I don't know if you had any experience with that you might comment on.
No, I personally don't have a weighted blanket, but I know a lot of friends that absolutely swear by them. And I do know sometimes I like to have a pillow on me. It feels nice to have a little weight on you as well.
Yeah, it's so cool. Just it's something about it is like somehow comforting or soothing. It's really interesting.
It's the cocoon effect.
Yeah, it must be.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is so important because it's like it's great that we are talking about sleep right now, because we know when we have a night of bad sleep, which is an area where a lot of us need to work on, we wake up the next day, cortisol levels are naturally higher. So cortisol is this hormone that naturally rises in the morning. It's a good thing. It wakes us up, except if we haven't slept well, cortisol levels can be a little aberrant. They can be too high. We don't have enough restorative factors. And that then in turn creates a snowball effect where we're a little crankier. We're not feeling as good. We might turn to stimulants. And then we're on this whole roller coaster ride where our mindset and our emotions start to get a little wacky. We're a little snappy with people. And then this cascade effect happens where we're not in this relaxed, happy state.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Anthony, how do you maintain good cortisol levels?
Well, I would say it all comes down to circadian rhythm. The things I would say is like looking at, first off, if you're not, to re-entrain a good, healthy circadian rhythm, it is in the morning to actually get out in sunshine on your skin, ideally 10, 15 minutes, and get sunshine in your eyes. I'm not saying stare directly at the sun, not great for your eyes, but make sure you're having sunshine hitting your eyes. That is having a profound effect on your neurochemistry, and it actually does change cortisol levels. So in the morning, cortisol naturally rises, and actually sunshine actually helps healthily blunt that effect, make sure it doesn't get too high or too low. And I bring this up because we don't talk enough about this. We think of our bodies as these independent mechanisms, and the environment is something outside of us. But this body developed in direct connection with the cycles of nature. So when we're looking at maintaining healthy cortisol, one thing we're going to do is obviously get some sunshine in the morning. Next thing is looking at the evening routine, all the stuff we already talked about with sleep. Third thing I would say is making sure your nutrition's on point, that blood sugar levels are not getting too high or too low. The way to essentially do that is to have, your balanced meals on a meal timing schedule set up. So I don't know if you have, your kind of meal timing kind of into your own unique schedule, but that's a huge area of opportunity. And there are some other supplements, that can help cut down on cortisol, certain herbs and stuff like that. If you'd like to know more about those, we can follow up on that as well. But I think it's really the circadian balance as well as our general management of our stress levels throughout the day. Cortisol is naturally supposed to spike in the morning and go down as the day progresses. And if we're not managing our fight or flight responses to the everyday stuff that comes up in our lives, we're going to get cortisol peaks in the day during a time when we're supposed to be winding down. This is kind of what happens with a lot of people at night. If you're doing a lot of work late at night or you're getting fired up about something, your mind is very racing. Cortisol levels that should be low at night then may spike. So I think it's twofold. It's like biocircadian rhythm. It's looking at your nutrition, I should say threefold. And then, exercise is very good for helping your body's response to cortisol as well. Daily exercise, not high intensity stuff, although very beneficial for a ton of different reasons. If you're looking to specifically control your cortisol levels, like do some fun stuff outside, A little more in the aerobic capacity would be very, very good. Breathing through your nose, helping that nervous system stay in that more relaxed state would be a very good thing. I think there is some actual research on like nature walking and how that affects cortisol levels dynamically. Like we're meant to be outside, breathing through our nose, fresh air, good sunshine. Like these things are more important to our health than we think about. So those are some things I'd recommend. And I can definitely follow up with you later today on some supplements and stuff that can help with cortisol as well.
A question?
Yeah.
How much does like what you eat actually matter? Like I know there's a giant health movement about eating super healthy, but is it more about like how you feel and then that's its own sake, or does it actually make a big impact on your epigenome or like cancer, things like that? Like if you're eating TV dinners and Doritos, like is that actually going to do much to you long term besides like your mood and energy?
Yeah, I'm on the camp and stance that it matters. So let's get into this a little bit, because in the fitness space, which is different than health and wellness, there's a kind of contrary movement where everyone's like, well, track your macros. If you track your macros, your proteins, carbs, your fats, you're on a general right calorie target. Turns out that you can manage your body composition well. Like I have a friend who's writing a book right now. He only ate fast food for I think 3 months, and he lost 10 pounds, most of it body fat, got 6-pack abs. But he did that by managing specifically, his calorie intake to make sure he was in a deficit, et cetera. We did his blood test after the fact, and turns out that he had, legitimately had scurvy, vitamin C deficiency from not eating the right kinds of foods. So what I would say is this is healthier foods. Calories are easy to come by. You can get calories in so many different places. Micronutrients are a lot harder to come by, and they're found in nature in like the best healthy foods. So if you were to do some kind of thing where you're eating microwavable TV dinners, but also making sure that you had all your micronutrients covered, like let's say you're taking a multivitamin, multi-mineral supplement that has you covered there, that would probably offset a lot of deficiencies that may be found in some of these processed foods. Other things to consider in those unhealthy foods would be like abnormally high levels of sodium. That can be a shock for the body. Salt's not bad, but having these huge spikes once in a while, not good. The other thing to consider too is like preservatives. We know there's a lot of shit stuff that's in foods. Like certain kinds of preservatives have been linked to cancer. There are plastics, microplastics in low quality foods. There are xenoestrogens that can dynamically affect your hormonal signaling. And so, yeah, I am of the camp that it matters a ton to eat healthy, non-processed, high-quality foods, because although we may not see the effects if we're keeping our calories in balance in the short term, in the long term, we definitely will. And it's not just about mood, stable blood sugar. Like it's also affecting our gut microbiome. When we eat a lot of crap foods, like if you're eating, like let's just say non-organic produce, stuff sprayed with pesticides, et cetera, or certain foods that are just not healthy for your gut microbiome, that will impact that, which then in turn impacts your neurotransmitter production in the gut and your immune function. So it's a long way of saying, I think it matters like quite a bit. I'm of the camp that you do the best you can. And it's not like you never have any of those foods. You may even proactively plan like a free meal to enjoy those things. But fruits, veggies, non-processed foods are going to be your best bet over the long haul. But when it comes to longevity, there are people that smoke and drink and eat bars of chocolate every day and live to 110. There is a genetic basis of this stuff. But for most of us, I think food quality is pretty much essential.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So going back to the topic of our conversation, which I absolutely love, you said it's about our thinking and emotions. And I think in general, it's a little bit easier to manage our thinking, or at least to be mindful of our thinking and kind of steer it in a positive direction if needed. But with emotions, I personally find it a lot more challenging. Is there any technique or anything you can recommend on, I don't know, controlling it?
Absolutely. So I'm going to define these terms in terms of like my awareness and understanding. Thinking would be like these thought forms, mental, like these ideas or the mental chatter or these running scripts. Emotion would be the feeling that we have. It could be a predominant like long-term emotional state. We call it emotional state, like your overall sense of well-being. And then there might be a more acute emotion that is something that could be a result of a situation or a thinking pattern. what I have found most transformative, I think a lot of people can say again too, is mindfulness practices such as meditation, things like this, awareness practices, and we're essentially the goal, I guess you could say, or the process more aptly is this: that we take time every day, ideally in the morning and at night, to sit in being just as presently and peacefully as possible, observing what comes up, just observing without attaching. What happens over time as you do this, and this is like very advanced meditators have very calm minds. Like I love it. It's like Eckhart Tolle is a good author. He's wrote a lot of amazing books. Power of Now. He was in an interview with David Blaine, and David Blaine was like, well, I can hold my breath for 10 minutes. And Eckhart Tolle said, well, I cannot think for 10 minutes. And I think that's amazing, right? So meditation trains the mind to be more placid and calm, which means there's less disruptive thought patterns. And it's not just the stuff we're consciously aware of. Our conscious mind is only a tiny fraction of our actual emotional based experience, which is the subconscious mind. So long story short, I think meditation, particularly in the morning and the night, is a hugely beneficial time because you do it in the morning. It enables your mind to be a little more calm as you go into the busyness of the workday. And at night, you get an added benefit too, because it allows your mind to kind of calm down, close loops, and just like get into a relaxing state. Because we know that we've all had bad dreams or recurrent stuff that kind of sets us up for a bad next day. So I think these bookends are uniquely powerful times to do a little bit of mindfulness meditation. I keep a practice. It's become something that I do twice a day, regardless, period, because I think it's just so beneficial.
For how long do you do it usually?
So I love when people ask how long, because
what's the minimum?
Well, the minimum, I think, 30 seconds. I mean, 1 minute of like being mindful is I think like infinitely better than zero. My practice now, let's just say, is maybe 30 minutes on average, but it's not as much about the time as much as about the quality. Because I could sit there in a meditation chair and identify with my thoughts and just think about things and be still. And that's okay. But being more intense, it's the intensity of the practice in terms of how present and released can you really be. And if you could do that in 5 minutes, amazingly powerful. And I think it's something you build up to. So I would say what I have found is important because I think consistency is what really matters with these types of practices, is that you build a location in your house where you do these things. So I have a meditation chair. It is in the same location. It is it's in my bedroom. So it's where I go to meditate. So it's like a visual cue. It's there. It's very easy. So wherever, if you want to be consistent with this practice, get the time, get the space for it, and start off small. Maybe do guided meditations if you're just getting started, and then you can go longer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
So on similar topic to this, when it comes to positive thinking, can we talk a little bit more about what that means? And I'll give you some context from my own perspective. So I work in crisis management and business continuity, and I thrive in stress, and I have some of the most morbid conversations on a daily basis because most of my job is planning. I think I'm a very positive person. But I feel like every time we talk about positivity or positive thinking, it's completely on a different spectrum than how I think on a day-to-day. So I'm having a hard time reconciling it. Maybe I've developed a subconscious way of dealing with kind of my work, but I just wanted your take on that.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more though. Like when you say how you think and experience, can you tell me what that's actually like? Like what is the actual experience?
It could be anything. I could be planning for a vacation. I always think about the worst possible scenario, and I actually plan for it. And I don't mean I click yes on the insurance when I'm booking a flight. It's more about like, all right, if I lose my credit card, or if I get mugged, or if someone gets, it's things like that. And I find peace in kind of the preparation or the anticipation of it. Kind of thinking about it. So, and that's the same thing with, work. It's like if the building's on fire, or if there's an attack, or, it's kind of like knowing that plan is in place that makes me feel better.
Here's my question. Do you feel fear? Do you feel fear while you're doing the planning, or is it just how your mind kind of works?
Actually, I don't feel fear. And I don't like disassociate emotions with what's happening. Like I'm not a psychopath. It's just that I feel like I've just become more maybe numb to, or disassociate kind of talking about an event than an actual event happening.
Yeah.
So
that totally makes sense. I mean, you've trained your mind to be a contingency planner. Like you solve problems and you look at things in terms of the 360 based on your line of work on what are the potential issues, how do we fix these kinds of things. You're looking at things from that level. My response would be, in my experience, as long as you're not emotionally invested, which you can tell through the litmus test of, are you experiencing fear and anxiety from this? If those are not present, then you're just doing your thing. And we all have different kind of patterns of thinking. Now, if there is an underlying, like, I am super anxious all the time because I legitimately think I'm going to be mugged, that actually will change those stress responses. It will shift the nervous system into the more fight or flight. But if you're just doing your routine and this is how you think in your process, like, that's awesome. Like, we all see Jason Bourne in those Bourne movies. Like, he's going into the room. He's like, there's 6 guys on the right. My exit's over here. I got a gun and I could probably kill this guy with my shoe. Like, but he's not stressed about it. Right. You know, so you might be our Jason Bourne. And I think that's totally fine as long as you're not having that emotional attachment to this. If this is just, you're thinking about things, then I think that's good to go. And I think there's a difference between positive thinking could be seen to be like just super optimistic, happy-go-lucky, but that's not how I'm necessarily defining it. I'm saying it's like, what is the overall state and quality of your emotion associated with your thinking, which, you know, you're a positive guy, but you also have a good healthy dose of realism and you're planning for these things. So in my book, that's just how your mind works. And I think it's awesome as long as you're not feeling fear or anxiety, which is the emotional state that's going to really do the change to the biochemistry.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question.
Cool. Time for one more question or so.
Dr. Wright, I have a question.
Yeah.
It's very timely, this whole lecture you're giving, and you talk about positivity, you talk about mental. I'm guess my question is more about coping mechanisms in this day and age right now, where we're social creatures and we can't be social. We can't get out of the house, or we can't be with people. I'm on the East Coast, where for 3 days I was locked in my house because of the snowstorm. So my question is, and if I go to work to be social, well, I work in a hospital and I'm surrounded by COVID patients, by other patients and people who are dying, and there's death. So when you come home, I guess my question is, how do you find the positivity? How, yes, you can say meditate, but I think a lot of the struggles with positivity, with eating correctly and taking care of yourself is impacted right now because so many of those avenues are not available to us right now.
Yes.
I'm not sure what it is, but how do you cope with that? What are other coping mechanisms when you can't go out like this? Even right now, talking to you guys on Zoom, it's just not the same as physically having that energy from being with another person. So how do we cope with that right now? And how do we find a way to find positivity and take care of ourselves?
I'll start off by saying I definitely don't have the answer, but I will give you my perspective. I think at face value, there is no surprise that we are having perhaps one of the biggest mental health crises in ever right now, because all these avenues are cut off for so many of us, and we do feel shut down. And that's just the nature of the beast, because we are social creatures. We're meant to connect and be these things. So it is somewhat of an uphill battle. What I would offer is, when it comes to positivity, what really I think is at the root of it is this idea of connection. So with positivity, it may be connection to a good future outcome, connection to something that has meaning for us. And when we don't have these avenues that are normal to connect with people, let's say in person, or even to have the same connections at work, one thing I do know, and this is a little bit of a meditative perspective, but I think it is true. One thing that's available to all of us is our connection to the very experience of being present. So one way that I would maybe suggest you could take up as a practice is to work on every single day trying to be as present as possible in every moment and every experience. And what this often means is less thinking and more experiencing. So right now we're having this conversation, and you and I are having this experience of talking and listening to one another. We're in this moment of on Zoom. So how present can we be? What I find is that when we're out of presence, which maybe we're wrapped in this daydream or this repeated thought pattern, or this thought of disconnection that we feel, or this anxiety, and we associate with that kind of takes us out of our one connection that we always do have, which is our connection to being present with whatever is. And oftentimes the actual experience is not positive. Like, you can be present to intense suffering. You can be present to the experience of feeling disconnected. And in my experience though, being present to those experiences, they start to lose some of their negative emotional charge. It just becomes kind of like what is. I guess we can kind of sit, it's a meditative perspective, we kind of sit in the nature of our being, of being present. So I think a presence practice, even if we're being present to the emotion of and allowing it, of feeling stuck, of feeling frustrated, is a lot better than adding more resistance and a greater story and a greater frustration to the fact that, oh man, I don't like this. Like, there's one way to be like, I don't like this, I hate this, I wish it could be different. And then there's the other aspect, could be, I feel this, I experience this fully, onwards. And I do recognize this answer is not fully helpful, but I do think it is. And I think it's kind of like, how do you take that kind of meditative mindset and kind of bringing it into your everyday by being more present and reflective?
No, that helps. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
It does.
Yeah, thanks for this. This was an amazing talk. Really appreciate it. We'll have the recording that we will send out at the end of Revivery, so you guys will have this. We'll also send out Dr. Anthony's tweet, and you can ask those questions as well. And then just quick check on our list. Hopefully, as a friendly reminder, everybody's checking off their teas and things that they're drinking throughout the day. Remember, most important thing is drinking every hour in the hour, getting liquids in your body. The next talk is with Dr. Bogard, and she's talking on gut hormones and inflammation, the holy trinity of life, lung health, and vitality.